Today I'm going to do something very exciting for me, maybe not for you. I've never done this kind of content before, but as you might be able to tell from just ignore this from these book covers, I'm going to be updating my reading log. So it's not technically a reading journal because it's a 2024 kind of all-in-one planner, just a summary of my year. Again, I do have a video of me setting up this video and talking about all of the pages that I did and how I'm planning to use it. But one of the pages, the spreads that I have is books in 2024. So I have never really visually presented the books that I've read in this way before that I can remember. I dabbled with listing the books in a ring planner when I used to use an A5 ring planner. I've never really had a visual representation, and so this is more just for fun and just a nice way to look back at it. I mostly track, not mostly, why did I say mostly? I track my books in Notion. So that's mostly why I don't have a reading journal, because I love Notion for tracking. I track the movies that I watch and shows, and I track the books that I read in Notion. I'm going to do a Notion, like a mini tour walkthrough. At the end of this video, I'm just going to show you my screen, and it's really, really simple, nothing special, but I will walk you through how I track my books in Notion. So this is not a tracker in the sense, it's more just like a visual summary of the books that I've read this year. Something that I also recently started doing thanks to Chris from Ella Nim. Chris is just wonderful at media logging and has inspired me to start my own media log in here. So if you have seen my past videos, then you know I've struggled with this kind of weekly layout. This is a Muji weekly diary, which I loved. I bought it in Japan. They have it in Australia as well, but it was just taking so long to fill out the highlights that I ended up. So I started doing a different week on every page, but there was so many pages left. I couldn't bear the thought of using it for another year. So I ended up switching to like 1 week on 2 pages. And eventually, inspired by Chris, I started just logging some of the media that I watched during the week. And it's not everything I consumed. So it's not podcasts or videos. There are some movies that I don't include. So it's not a comprehensive, detailed media tracker. I'm just logging some highlights, and I just choose 4 from the week basically. But I had never really seen that style of media logging before, and I really liked how casually Chris did it, and it was just a really nice time capsule, as they explain it, of what you consumed that week. And it's not as significant now to look back on. I mean, already this is like such a nice memory, and I feel like I can think back to that week already so much clearer. But I know that in a few months it'll be nice to look back on this memory and to see what movies I watched, what books I enjoyed. And so yeah, there are like 3 movies and maybe 2 books in here that I haven't even logged. So again, this is not meant to be a comprehensive media tracker. This is just me logging some movies and some books that I read over the month, give or take, because sometimes I start the book in the previous month. This is this current week. Did I say month? I meant week. This is this current week, and I am currently reading this book, and I've printed off. That's for this week. We just finished watching that yesterday. Poor things. I have opinions about that, but this is a reading log video, not a media video. But I have very strong opinions and feelings about this film, not all positive, but that is one of the movies that are going there this week. I'm currently reading this, and this is also next up on my list, so that's going to go here as well. So the first thing I'm going to do, I guess, is cut all this up. This is for Life Archives. I just wanted to fill up the page, but I had enough to finally fill a page in my reading log. So I have been looking forward to doing this, but I've been holding off a little bit. Now that I know the general size, I mean, I didn't measure, I kind of just guessed, but now that I know the general size, I think that'll fit really well. I won't have to wait as long. I might do a row at a time, which is like a month at a time. No, a month would be about 8-ish books. But yes, these are the books that I have read or are currently reading so far this year in 2024. It's been a few solid months of reading. But first, let's cut it up and then start to stick everything down. That's going to be the fun part, just like putting it all down and seeing a pretty little summary of it. But I'm going to cut it using scissors and my very clunky rotary cutter, which I don't want to say I regret buying it, but it serves its purpose, but it's also very annoying. So if you're wondering, would I recommend this cutter? It depends. It depends on your needs, but I much prefer like a guillotine. I miss having, is it guillotine or guillotine? Because I feel like everyone says, I'm pretty sure the technical way to pronounce it is guillotine. So I'm going to say that. I'm sorry if that's wrong and you're laughing at me, but yeah, I don't feel like the cut with a rotary cutter is very crisp, especially with paper. I think when you have thicker paper, it works kind of well, like cardstock. But anyway, let's do some cutting. I wasn't sure if I was going to do a voiceover or just talk to you as I do this. You know, I'm in the mood to chat, and this is kind of a brainless activity. So yeah, let's chat. So I am terrible at, no, that's a lie. I think I'm pretty good at like fussy cutting PET tape, but when it comes to straight lines, yeah, not so much. So that's why I like to use the rotary cutter or just the silhouette to cut for me as much as possible, because I am not great at it. These are not going to be all the same size, but it's going to be close enough. So I guess I will start by just chatting about, I've cut into so many of the book pages, that's fine. I will start by talking about my reading style, I guess, and I think you can already get an idea for what my reading style is. I am kind of a fast reader, but also I think what helps me read the books that I want to read is that, no, don't be a perfectionist, they're good, they're done, is that I, like, reading is a hobby for me, so I look forward to reading. As much as I make it, not a goal, but I do like to track how much I read. I do like to challenge myself to read, you know, a certain percentage every day. It is also very fun for me, and it is a hobby. So when I'm not working, I want to read. It is how I like to recharge and unwind. I've lost my train of thought. I thought cutting would not require much concentration, but clearly this is very taxing for my brain. Yeah, so I thought I would share my reading routine, I guess. Well, let's just say I was an avid reader when I was a child. You could not get me to stop reading, and I would get in trouble for reading too much. I would read at the dinner table. I wouldn't talk to anyone. Like, I would want to eat my dinner while reading, and so I'd get in trouble for bringing my books to the dinner table. I would not want to go to sleep because I would just want to read, and I would be caught out many times because I would just hide under my bed sheets, my blanket. Let me just adjust this mic. Hopefully it's a little closer now. I would hide under my blanket with a torch because there were no phones back in the day. I didn't have a phone back then. When I was a child, I would hide under the blankets with a torch trying to read because I was obsessed. I would get so immersed in the worlds, and I can barely remember what I read back then. I read one of my most memorable series that I read when I was younger was like Darren Shay. vampire saga, something like that. Again, this is around the time where internet was barely a thing, and I would just go to the library and borrow whatever I saw. And that's actually still one of my favorite ways to borrow books. So a lot of the times, like for example, Before the Coffee Gets Cold, I had no idea this was a popular book. I had never heard of it in my life. I'd never seen anyone else talk about it, but I saw it on the bookshelf at my library. I saw it on the shelf and I was like, that's such a cute title. That's such a cute book title. And I loved the illustration art, so I borrowed the book. And I guess maybe the library had put it on a featured shelf or something. I have no idea, but I tend to just wander around the library and just grab whatever book draws my attention. And yes, I judge books by its cover, but I tend to read the blurb and see if it's something I actually would like. But I do challenge myself to read books that I wouldn't normally read as well, because yes, reading is fun and it's definitely a hobby for me, but I do like to read a lot of nonfiction as well, because I want to learn, I want to expand my mind, I want to read other people's perspectives that I wouldn't normally get a chance to experience on that level. So I actually do really enjoy nonfiction books. It definitely takes me longer to get through a nonfiction book because I feel like the content is always a lot denser. It's not just descriptive language that you can get through quite easily. It takes a lot longer to absorb the information. I'm starting to sweat. The sun is coming out through my window, so I might take off my cardigan soon, but yeah, so I went from being really obsessed with reading when I was a child, and then somewhere around I was still reading a little bit in high school, like those assigned books that you get in school. Did you get those as well? I read all those books. I feel like most people don't read those books. I actually read the books that we were given, and they were great books, so I really enjoyed it. So we had Emma one year and Frankenstein. Excellent books. English Advanced had Wuthering Heights, and I heard that they had that book, so I also read that book in high school. That is due for a reread because I barely remember the book. It gets to a point sometimes where I vaguely remember the concept of the book and maybe how it ended and how the plot went, but I don't remember the specifics of the book, and that's when I like to reread. But generally I do not ever really reread books because I just feel like there's so many, I'm destroying this cut. There are so many good new books out there, and there's so many books and not enough time. But anyway, after high school, during uni or college, depending on where you live, during those days, I was studying so much. Uni was 40-hour weeks, and that was just classes, 40 hours of classes and labs and tutorials, and it was just exhausting. And I did have some time, obviously, to do other creative stuff, but I did not prioritize reading around then, and it took me a few years to get back into it. So I really got back into reading about 4 or 5 years ago. This is a really off cut. If I just keep cutting it, I'm just going to destroy the book. So I really need to stop. This is like when you're trying to cut your own hair and you're like, oh, just a little bit more to even it out, and then you've just cut off inches. My God, that looks okay, I guess. What was I saying? Yeah, so about 4 years ago, I got back into reading, and it actually started because I did a book club for my Patreon because I wanted to read, my new goal was to read a book a month. I really wanted to aim to try to finish a book in 1 month because at that time I was not prioritizing reading. I didn't have any sort of routine or system. And so I really got back into reading after that. I fell back in love with it again, and I don't do the Patreon book club anymore. I do a workshop book club. We actually did 12-week year. That was the first book we did this year. And so I will prioritize doing business books for my workshop tier. That's 4 times a year. I just found that it was just too much pressure for people to join you to read. Like, people read at their own pace, and I didn't want people to feel bad that they didn't have time to read. And also I was like spamming people a little bit too much, so I cut down on some of the rewards. Anyway, so after that year, I think, like, I can barely remember, but it definitely sparked my love for reading again, and I think that picked up around 2022, 2023. Yes, 2022, because I read like 90 something books that year, maybe like 94. My goal was 100. I actually haven't really ever hit my goals, like my reading goals, but like it's such an arbitrary number. I don't really care. My goal for this year is 80. I think because last year I couldn't hit that. I actually don't remember how many books I read last year. So yes, I've had I wouldn't say rocky relationship with reading, but I've had an on and off relationship. Like, at times it's been very passionate, all in, all consuming, and then I had a brief break when I was in my 20s and my teens and, you know, prioritizing other life things. I did read occasionally, like Twilight. I read 50 Shades of Grey and all that stuff, but I didn't have a consistent reading routine, definitely not like what you see today. And this has only really picked up again in the past 3 years. But yeah, so now my reading routine is in the mornings. It's the first thing I do when I wake up, and it's the last thing I do before I sleep. I feel like it really helps me to rest my mind, because I have a really, really restless mind and it takes me a while to get to sleep, but reading really helps to quieten my mind, as long as the book doesn't get too exciting. But it really helps me to rest my mind and relax. So I read on my phone. So it's not like, reading helps me get off my phone. No, because I use my phone to read. It's just easier. It's easier than trying to hold up a book. It's easier than, you know, needing to keep the light on when you read and straining your eyes. I don't mind reading on my phone at all. And it's great for nonfiction because you can highlight books that way. I literally just use the Books app on my iPhone. But yeah, even when I borrow library books or I have the physical book, I download the ebook version so that I can read it in bed very easily. Because I wake up a lot earlier than my husband as well, usually like 1 to 2 hours earlier, and I don't want to wake him up. And so just being able to read on my phone is just a really, really nice way around that. But I typically read, depending on the day, depending on the season, about half an hour to an hour, sometimes 2 hours in the mornings. Depends when I wake up. So for example, sometimes I'll wake up at 6 and then I can read until about 7:30, 7:40 before I need to get out of bed to get ready. Like, my husband needs to get ready for work. Other days I may sleep in a little bit more until 7, and then I only have about 40 minutes to read. So it really depends, but I usually can squeeze in at least half an hour of reading in the morning. And then I also read at lunch. I love reading at lunch. And then I also read at night, like I said, before bed. And that I can usually squeeze in a bit more at night. I probably read the most at night, which is at least an hour, unless I'm doing some work and I get into bed late. But I usually read from 10 to 11. And then 11 is when I will clock off and go to sleep. But did I finish? Is that everything? Yay, that's everything. Oh no, it's not. I have these 2 books here. So that's about 2 to 3 hours a day of reading, and I feel like it doesn't sound like much, right? Like, I think it's very maintainable, achievable, and I don't really have to go out of my way to read. Like, I really look forward to waking up and reading. Like, sometimes I am sleepy, so I need to play a few games to wake me up. Like, I have a few puzzle games. I know that sounds so like not fun, but I have puzzle games that I like to play. Those are the only games really on my phone. But once I do that, I have this farm game, I check in with my crops, then generally I'm ready to read. But I don't go on Instagram very often, so that's not too hard for me to resist. I feel like I wouldn't have the energy to, just personally, I wouldn't have the energy to absorb that much. I think I get very easily overstimulated, so social media for me isn't a place of joy, and I am very aware of that. Like, I'm not saying it's a bad place. I'm just saying that I have to be selective of when I do use social media. I can't remember if I used to like wake up and I can't see where one book ends and the other book begins. I can't remember how I used to wake up before I had a reading routine, but I probably did go on social media or Instagram. Okay, done. Yay, let me get rid of this. Okay, I'm sweating, so the cardigan is coming off. But yeah, I don't think I spend an obscene amount of time reading. Like, I think it's very normal and manageable. Sometimes I will wake up at 6:30 and I usually am off the computer and in bed by 10 o'clock. And I think those are like very standard-ish times. But for me, that's what works. I'm not saying like that's what you need to do. I think what works for me is like making the time for reading rather than, reading when you feel like it. Having a reading routine is what has really helped me get back into reading like consistently. So, I mean, the answer to everything, almost everything, is consistency, whether that's working out or reading. Just having a routine, having a system that you can fall back on without too much effort is, I mean, at least for me, is what works really well. So I'm going to stick 4 across and 4 down, I think. Oh, these are all scrambled up. So I'm going to refer to my Notion to see the order in which I read it, and I'm going to use my star rating stickers. These aren't even cut. Okay, I'm not going to use these. These are a seconds, but I have somewhere star rating stickers that I haven't listed in my shop yet. I probably should. It's because the outline was too small and the stars kept tearing off, so I needed to like go back to the drawing board, but I'm going to use these. And I'm looking at my Notion now. So the very first book I read in 2024, which I remember I started in 2023 at the end of the year, was House of Hollow, this one. This was a strange book. So strange. It's one of those books where it's like it's all vibes and no plot. There was a plot and there was a good twist, but it wasn't my favorite kind of book. It was a little strange for me. But I rated this at 3 stars. How do I do this without... I did print off a guide, but it's not very good. Sure, it might work. I might just lay this behind. I don't know if that helps. Oh yeah, I can kind of see it faintly behind. I don't know if it comes up on camera. Might move it up a bit higher. So it starts here and it ends about here. I do not mind that. Okay, I think that's pretty good. I'm just going to glue tape it down and just like pray for the best. It doesn't need to be perfect, but hopefully it looks straight. Yeah, this book, I wouldn't personally recommend it. It is on the darker side. It's eerie. It's got vibes. But I found all the characters to be kind of flat and it was a weird book. A lot of vibes, but not the best way to start the year. That looks straight-ish. It's such a beautiful cover though. That's definitely why I read it. I can't remember where I saw this. It must have been like someone must have recommended it, or I saw it on Storygraph. Okay, so I use Notion. I used to use Goodreads, but now I prefer Storygraph. It's just something about the platform. It's a little bit easier not easier, but it's a little bit nicer to use. And anytime I come across a book that I want to read, I just add it to my to read pile on Goodreads. Let me stick down a sticker. But yeah, I rated this book at 3 stars, which I think is pretty generous. I might actually downgrade that to like 2.5. I don't think the writing was bad. I just think like I wouldn't really miss anything if I didn't read the book, if that makes sense. You will see me go outside the lines a lot when I'm coloring in these stars because I'm just not very good at staying in the lines. And sometimes I like start thinking about something else and I forget and I end up just coloring the whole thing. So I'm trying to focus and remember I'm going to downgrade it to 2.5. And I feel like I do tend to do that often, like go back and either increase the rating or reduce the rating. Okay, and the next book that I read was The Poppy War. I didn't realize that was the second book I read. So this is a pretty heavy book. It's the first book that I read of R.F. Kuang, and as you will see later, I also read Yellowface of hers, which is like a completely different book. I rated this a 4 stars, not because I loved it, but because when I'm rating a book, it's hard to separate my enjoyment and like my objective review of the book. So I didn't think it was a fantastic book, but I feel like her writing was, I don't know, it was quite impressive. And I feel like she knew how to really immerse you into the world, but also it's based on true historical events. And I just felt like her depiction of war, it didn't feel right for me to rate it less than 4 just because of the breadth of knowledge that she covered. So it's quite a heavy book and there's a lot happening in the book. And I do really like the way she wrote her characters. There wasn't much character development is probably my only gripe, and I wasn't enticed enough to, oh God, let me line this up. I wasn't enticed enough to read the second book because it is a trilogy. So I don't know, it's probably closer to a 3.5, but her writing is good. And I feel like, you know, a lot of it probably flew over my head a little bit because I don't tend to read a lot of like historical war novels. Like it's meant to be a fantasy fiction novel, but there's a lot of, again, history that she weaved into the book. So yeah, it's probably closer to a 3.5. I might downgrade that as well. But those kinds of books are a little bit hard for me to rate because, again, I didn't love the book, but I can appreciate the book. And so I forget how I'm rating it sometimes. Oh no, it's like lower. Okay, let's downgrade that to a 3.5, especially considering now all the books that I have read and loved. I think it's only fair to like revisit your ratings of some books. But what gets me about book ratings is that it is so arbitrary and subjective. And I always have this guilt of rating someone's work because I didn't write the book. I didn't put in the effort to write this book. And I feel like I'm so entitled to be like, you know what? I didn't like the book, 2 stars. And so I'm a little bit wary of that process. I need to concentrate so I don't highlight more than 3 stars. Half. So yeah, I try not to feel too guilty sometimes, but some books I find are so terrible. But even then, people can read the same book and have completely different experiences with it. And I feel like if I read this book 5 years ago or 5 years later, like 5 years in the future, again, I would have a totally different experience about it. And that's what's so intriguing about books, because how you read it is it's just related to your current life experience. And you may read it in 2 years and completely hate the book that you loved at the time. And I feel like movies are like that as well. So it's hard for my brain to reconcile that idea and to rate things objectively, because the type 1 in me wants to be objective and to rate it fairly. But then I can't help but, you know, take into account my enjoyment and my own perspectives as well. The next book that I read was Kingdom of the Wicked. I had high hopes for this book. This was a terrible book. I'm sorry. I know some people have said that they love this book. I just felt it was like Throne of Glass. Wait, I must have read Throne of Glass last year. It was like Throne of Glass. Like, what am I reading? Am I reading like a fake copy of this book? Because I don't understand the hype. And again, my ratings are my own, and I do not want to offend anyone by saying I hate the books that they loved. So please do not take offense. It's just my own personal interpretation. But yeah, I hated this book. I felt like it had so much potential. I loved the idea of it, but just the dialogue and the character development, it was so all over the place. And it just didn't really make sense. It didn't feel like a polished story. I don't necessarily need a book to be, beautiful writing every time, but I feel like I do have a minimum requirement, or at least if the book is not written well, then the story is super interesting or just fun, but this was a miss for me, for sure. So I rated that a 2 stars, which is quite harsh for me, but there are a few 2 stars ratings in this year so far. These are all uneven, but it'll do. So I loved the book cover. I heard people rave about this book, so I was really excited to read it, but it was not my favorite. Again, I loved the concept of it, and I had such high hopes for it, but the characters were just super flat and unbelievable, and yeah. Again, where it was all vibes and not much happening. The next book that I read was Work Cleaned. So this is a non-fiction book. The tagline says the life-changing power of mise en place. I think that's how you say it. It's a French term. Mise en place I can't read that. To organize your life, work, and mind. So it was a very chef-inspired non-fiction book, how to take the concepts of mise en place in the kitchen and apply that to your life. This book aggravated me so much because I felt like the author, the tone that the author was writing in was just condescending, and I just have a problem with books where the authors make generalizations for everyone, and this applies to videos as well, productivity videos. But anytime someone says we all struggle with this, this is something we all struggle with, we all have an addiction to our phones, I don't like those overarching statements, and this author did that a lot in this book rather than, I think there's an art to writing about systems and productivity and business without being preachy. I think it is a skill to do that. So I am not a fan of preachy books that assume that your life is a mess as much as theirs, and they're coming to save you. But I rated that a 3 stars because there were some valid points in the book. It wasn't a complete disaster. But I should mention also, I don't know why I read this book, but again, trying to challenge myself. I am not a big fan of cooking or fine dining. I'm not really in the food industry like that. I'm a foodie in the sense that I love to eat and I love good food, as most people would. I think everyone would, but I do not have interest in cooking or I don't watch MasterChef. I don't like baking. I don't like what's the show everyone watches? The Britain baking show. Again, I'm not trying to offend anyone. I'm just trying to give context of the kind of books that I am drawn to. So I kind of already went into this book with a little bit of a bias, and I just didn't I respect, chefs and I respect any hustle. I respect any career, but I, again, am against putting anything really on a pedestal, and I didn't like the preachy nature of this book. So it got a 3 stars from me, which is an average rating. It's not a terrible rating, but it's also not sure if I would recommend this book at 3 stars. And if it's under 3 stars, I'm definitely not recommending it. But that's my first 4 books. I love the aesthetics of it. I definitely am a book cover judger. I can't help it, but it really makes a difference. I have read some books, though, with terrible covers, so I am trying to be a little bit more open to bad book covers because sometimes you are pleasantly surprised. Okay, so we didn't have a good start to 2024, but the next book I read in 2024 was... Where is it? There's book covers everywhere. I can't find... Oh, here we go. You will all know it, but it was Divine Rivals, and I gave this a 5 stars. I loved this book, like adored this book. God, I want to reread this book already. Like, I just love this book so much, and I have a typewriter. So this was very close to my heart because it just re-sparked so much love for my typewriter and just letters. I rated it 5 stars because I loved it and devoured it, but it wasn't a perfect book. So I gotta say that. So even though I rate some books 5 stars, it doesn't mean it was a perfect book. There were still things I didn't like about this book, but overall, just it's a beautiful book and I love all the fan art for it. But I actually had never heard of this book. Again, I know it's a very popular book, but I heard of this book through a customer of mine. So she tagged my tote bag, which had an Oscar Wilde quote on it, like with Freedom Books, Flowers on the Moon, who could not be happy. So she tagged me in that photo with that tote bag, and she had this book also in the photo, and she was raving about the book in the caption. And I was like, well, that's a sign because you're photographing the tote bag with this book that you love. So I'm going to read that book. And it turned out to be incredible. I loved it so much. Again, not a perfect book in a lot of ways, but I loved it. I just really enjoyed it. And so now I know after reading it that it is a, what do you call it, like book talk book. But I think this one does live up to the hype. I can definitely see some people not liking the book, but I did very much enjoy it. The beginning of the book is definitely my favorite. I do like the slow burn style of books. But yes, I rated that a 5 stars, and right after finishing this, I most certainly read the second book, which is Ruthless Vows. And usually when you read a sequel or another book in the series, it doesn't always live up to the hype, like it doesn't always match. But I also rated Ruthless Vows a 5 stars. Surprisingly, I felt like Rebecca Ross did a really, that's a terrible star. Rebecca Ross did a really good job. Should I zoom in? Is that better? Have I just been like doing it way too far away? I'm so sorry. But yes, Rebecca Ross did a really good job of developing these characters, and I feel like that's something that books don't do very well. They do a good job of building up the tension between two characters and the slow burn and like just the stage before they're together, which I do enjoy, but I feel like not many authors focus on the after part. Like, I also want to see them spend time together as a happy couple. But yeah, I feel like this is a thing in TV shows as well. There's a lot more emphasis on the getting together part rather than the staying together part. And I'm not a fan of the slow burn and then all of a sudden it becomes a plot-based like book or show, and suddenly their relationship just revolves around them going through events together rather than focusing on developing their relationship. I would much rather the character-driven side of their relationship, which they always focus on in the beginning, and then it just becomes a plot thing. One example of that, a very classic example of that, is Vampire Diaries. Like, season 1 compared to the rest of the seasons, totally different. I think I stopped watching after season 3, so yeah, it just got a bit too ridiculous and plot-driven for me. Again, no offense if you are a Vampire Diaries fan, but I did very much love the first season, which has extremely different vibes to the rest. That's even enough, I think. So I don't know if it was a mistake leaving the updating of this book until I had read this many. Like, I wasn't sure how many I should update in a video until it gets boring. Like, maybe I'll do it once a month, like a month recap. Maybe it can become part of my monthly reset. I don't know. But at this rate, I'm currently reading about 8 books a month. And I've got to say that some books are really easy to read and some books take a lot longer. So if I'm reading a lot of fiction, then yeah, it'll only take me like 2 days, 3 days. I think this took me about 3 days. Whereas this, nonfiction, would take me like 5-6 days, especially if I don't like the book. But something that I do now that I thought I would never do, you know, filling in these stars is not fun. and I'm looking to get a star stamp made for my shop. I would really like to have a star rating stamp, but I find filling in these stars a little stressful because I'm not staying in the lines. What was I saying? Oh yeah, so something I do now is I read 2 books at once, very rarely 3 times, but I used to be like a 1 book only at a time person. But because nonfiction takes me so much longer and I want to enjoy myself at night, I want to unwind again. So I prefer to read fiction at night and then nonfiction during the day when I'm much more, awake and focused, and I'm trying not to get addicted to the book. So in the mornings, I will read a mix of both depending on how I feel. So if I start with a nonfiction, I might just go back to sleep if it's too boring. So I might read a little bit of the fiction book and then switch to the nonfiction. At lunch, I usually always read the nonfiction. And then at nighttime, I only read the fiction. And at first, I thought I wouldn't be able to keep on top of it, like it would be too confusing to read 2 books at once, but it's surprisingly really easy. Like it doesn't affect it at all, especially if I'm reading a nonfiction and a fiction because they're so different. So I tend not to read 2 fiction books unless they're quite different as well. But anyway, the next book that I read is A Spell of Good Things, and then after that I read Crescent City. So A Spell of Good Things, I also rated 5 stars. This is a book, again, randomly just found in my library. I saw the book cover, I read the blurb, and I thought it sounded really interesting and different from what I've read before. It actually was not what I was expecting at all, but I do like parallel timelines, like alternate timelines, but also parallel character perspectives. When it's done well, I find them very interesting. But yeah, this was a very unexpected book, and I rated it 5 stars because I thought it was written really lovely. Very different. It took me a while to adjust to it, but it was beautiful and very poignant and very bittersweet, and I ended up just like sobbing. Yeah, and it was just very tense. It was a very, very tense book. So not exactly a relaxing book, but still a very, very stunning book, and I'm so glad that I just love stumbling across these random books that I might not have ever heard about or seen or read if I didn't see it in my library. So I am a fan of just trawling through the library shelves and seeing whatever jumps out at me. I don't want to ruin it, but I will say there are 2 different characters mainly that you experience their lives through their perspectives, and it's just like their lives are intertwined in a way, and you don't really see how it's linked until the end of the book. But it's also just like such a contrast between the 2 different ways that they live. One person lives so much poorer, one person is, surrounded by wealth and privilege, and it's just, there are so many. I could do a whole video just on this book, but it was beautiful. I highly recommend this book. If you don't mind a bit of heaviness, I ran to my husband. I was like, you have to listen to this. Listen to the end of the book. And I proceeded to explain the entire book just so he could understand why I was crying. I read Crescent City. Okay, look, now the mob is going to come for me. I'm so sorry, but I'm not a Sarah J. Maas fan. I just can't do it. Like, this book wasn't bad. There were actually a lot of things that I did like about this book. And it's the only Sarah J. Maas book that I have liked so far. Apparently it's her only adult book, her first adult book. But I'm not a fan. Something about her writing is just not for me. And her characters, and I don't think I like Faye's either. Again, there was a lot of things that I liked about the book, especially the friendship aspect of it. But I'm not a big fan of the way she writes her characters. I think she's really good at world building. And I think maybe that's where it goes wrong, because I'm not the biggest fan of world building. I'm much more focused on characters and slow burn and less plot. But this is very world building, plot heavy. But yeah, I didn't I didn't really like it. I did rate it at 3 stars, and I actually wasn't going to read the second book. I was ready to give up on the series. But my friend, who is also my patron and my admin, Kieran. Kieran from Kieran Blackley. I feel like every time I say your last name, I say it wrong. Blackley. She is a big Sarah J Maas fan, and she said I had to read the second book, which I did, and you will find out soon what I thought of that. But I read A Court of Thorns and Roses. Again, it was okay for me. Like, I enjoyed the book, but it wasn't great. And I found it was just a retelling of Beauty and the Beast in kind of a modernish way, but there were a lot of things I didn't like about the book either. It just wasn't anything special. I mean, not saying every book has to be special, but I just wasn't invested in the characters. I just didn't like the way she wrote her characters. So I was going to leave the series there as well. But then Kieran said I had to read book 2. Well, she told me the plot twist, and I was like, well, now I have to read it. So I did read book 2 last year, and I was about to colour in more. And I didn't really like that either. So I gave them both a 3 stars, I think. And I also read Throne of Glass, which was my least favourite book, and another one of those books of like, am I reading the same book as everyone? The way the main character was written, I have a really bad memory of character names, by the way. I don't know if you'll realize that eventually, but I can't name characters. It's, in my opinion, the least important part of the book, so I definitely don't absorb that. As long as I remember the story and what happened, I think that's more important than the character names. But yeah, I did not like Throne of Glass at all. The next book that I read was Child of Light. So we were on a bad book roll because I hated this book. It was so bizarre. I didn't know what I was reading. Again, the concept had so much potential, but the dialogue, like, was this book even edited? I don't want to be mean, but also I did not like this book. It was so bizarre and almost surreal, the things that he made his characters say and think, and it was just, yeah, I don't know. It had so much promise. I felt like I would have liked the book, but it was so bizarre. It's the only way that I can explain it. The book cover looks beautiful as well. I gave Child of Light a 2 stars, which I think is generous, but this book left me flabbergasted. Like, what am I reading? And I think it's also a trilogy or part of a series. These stars that I am colouring in look terrible, and I don't know if you can tell, but I'm doing my best, and I also don't care. But the next book that I read, this was a book recommendation from Savannah Scribbles. So I joined her Patreon, and she mentioned this book on her Discord. She raved about it. I said it wrong in my last video. I said Nocticardia, which is like such an Australian way of saying it, but she said Nocticadia, which sounds so much nicer. So Nocticadia. Oh my god, I loved this book. There were so many trigger warnings. I rated it a 4 stars, but I did love this book. But I think it lost a star because there were some problematic things about it. First of all, the age thing. I am not a huge fan of massive age gaps, especially when the female is so young. I find it really bizarre. I think as a 31-year-old woman, me now, turning 32, I find it a little weird to be reading about 18-year-olds. I don't think she was 18 in this book. I think she was maybe 21. But Carrie Lake, I mean, I still loved all the vibes of this book, and it was actually written fairly well. But the age thing, there were some weird plot things, but overall, devoured this book. Loved it. Very dark. Please be warned, there are a lot of trigger warnings in this book, but it's very much a dark romance. And I didn't know what that genre was until I read this book, and I'm like, oh, okay, it makes sense now. So this is dark romance. I'm a huge fan of dark romance and fantasy, but I feel like most of my books are like kind of on the dark side. Doesn't mean I don't read positive books, but I find them a little bit more entertaining. But this definitely started a whole Carrie Lake marathon for lack of a better word. I started reading so many more of her books after this, but it didn't really compare to Nocticadia. This was one of her best books, maybe her most recent one, I'm not sure. But that one got a 4 stars from me. Should I fill it in later? Am I wasting your time? Should I just do that? Does that annoy you that I've left it? I'm going to do it at the end. I'm just doing it now so I can speed through this. Well, not speed through, so I can just hurry it up a little bit. But the next book of hers that I read was The Isle of Sin and Shadows, which was not great, disappointingly. I rated that a 3 stars. Probably could downgrade that to a 2.5. I think I might downgrade that. The only way I know how to explain it is that there was less development of the characters, less of a story. It definitely wasn't as intense, even though it was still quite dark, but yeah, I feel like it was a very different book to Nocticadia. And then, while I was reading these dark romance, dirty books, they are smutty, by the way. If you're not a fan of smut, stay away from these books, but I read The 12-Week Year for my Patreon book club. This book, okay, I have opinions. So I was very curious to read this book because I feel like everyone talks about the 12-week year. They talk about how it changes their life. I'm not convinced about the 12-week year. I plan quarterly and I did not get enough of an explanation why 12 weeks was superior to quarterly. It is so close, and I feel like this book kind of ignored that quarterly planning existed. It only compared itself to yearly planning. So in terms of the concept of the 12-week year, I don't like it. I don't agree. I think like do whatever works for you, but I don't think it's, you know, this profound concept that's going to change your productivity. I still rated it a 4 stars because there are some excellent quotes. So in terms of just like a productivity business book, it's a really good book. If we're talking about the concept of the 12-week year, I didn't like it. But yes, I did highlight a lot of things in this book that I agreed with. I feel like it echoed a lot of my sentiments. Did I say that weird? It echoed a lot of my sentiments about productivity and breaking down your tasks to like a much more granular level, and that's the way you achieve things, but also making sure your vision is, this is looking great by the way, making sure that your vision is, like what you do in the day-to-day is aligned with your long-term vision. So I do recommend this. I did record a video for my patrons for the Patreon book club. I am still tossing up whether or not I want to release it eventually on my channel. So it's kind of just sitting there for now, but yes, I did record a video just talking, just giving a really rough summary, my favorite quotes, my takeaways, and how you could apply that. But the next book I read, another Kerry Lake book, was Master of Salt and Bones. I really like this book cover. Let me get you a closer look. Yeah, I really like this book cover. I think it's really pretty, but this book was a little problematic. Again, she was just so young, and it was like constantly emphasizing how young she was, and I don't know, it just left me feeling a little icky. That is not my thing. I find that just a little bit icky, of like how young the girl is and how much older the guy is. There's quite a bit of a gap down the bottom, but I don't think that's too bad. Like it could be a lot worse, the spacing. I think the book had potential, but there was a lot of weird, I gave it a 3.5, which is a lot higher than that. But yeah, I didn't hate it, and there was definitely some weirdness, but I did like the plot twists. I feel like Kerry Lake does plot twists really well, but after reading several of her books, you do realize that she follows a pattern with her books and her characters. 3.5. The next book that I read was Before the Coffee Gets Cold. Again, really cute book. I just saw it in my library and wanted to read it, but now I know it's actually a popular book. I am a little conflicted about this book. I'm not a big fan of translated books. I don't know if that makes me a snob, but I'm not a fan of the way it translates. Because I feel like it makes it it just ruins the flow a little bit and it sounds a bit awkward. The concept was interesting. I haven't really read a book with this kind of concept. It's not like completely original, but it was okay. I rated it a 3.5 stars. I was thinking about it a little bit once I had finished the book, and I feel like that's, a sign it did leave a bit of an impact. But I'm not sure if it's a fair rating because it is a translated book. And I just found the characters were a little dramatic, like the way they talked. Again, could be a translating thing. I gave it 3.5. I just realized I don't need to fill in the first star. I can just do that and know where it goes up to. Yeah, so I don't know if I'd recommend it. It's not a bad book. It's fairly easy to read, but it wasn't my favorite. But it did make you think a little bit. So it wasn't bad. That's all I can really say. The next book that I read, it had a terrible book cover, so I had to remake it because I didn't want the terrible book cover in my reading log. So it's Ripple Effect by Kerry Lake, and the original book cover was a shirtless guy. And I didn't want to read the book because of that. But again, I was trying to challenge myself. Like, you never know. Sometimes the book cover can be terrible, but the book might actually be good. This was one of those times where the book cover was as bad as the book. So I had to remake the cover because I did not want the original in the book. So I just used a random water image from Canva and just made my own fake book cover. But this was not a good book. I gave it a 2 stars. Again, I have not learned my lesson, but there is such a big age gap and there is just a huge emphasis. I got glue tape on the page. I don't know why I do this because I always make it worse, but it just bothers me that it's still sticky. There was a massive emphasis on how young and innocent she was, but not innocent because the world messed her up and just, I wasn't a fan. Also one of those books where it was more smut than story. I need a good balance, okay? It can't just be all smut. But obviously no shade if that's what you want. I hate it when the corners, I don't get the corners and they stick up. But I think that blends in really well. So I gave this one a 2 stars. And then the next book was a non-fiction book. So I kind of went I usually try to alternate. Last year I was alternating between fiction and non-fiction a lot more often. And then this year I'm screw it. I'm just going to read what I want to read and then try to work in a non-fiction book every now and then. So I had read these 2 non-fiction books and then I read The Origins of You. This was another random library read, but it turned out to be quite good. It's not really anything new. I feel like there's a lot of books like this, but I still found it kind of fascinating if you are interested in, unpacking childhood wounds and understanding how it impacts the way you act now. So she delves into a lot of the different kinds of childhood wounds and how that affects the way you, react in fights, how you handle arguments and fights, and how you could be self-sabotaging your relationships even now. So yeah, I feel like this book is a really great starting point for understanding what your what your triggers are and where is it that you could possibly be unhealed. Where are the childhood wounds that you haven't addressed yet that are still affecting the way that you live your life today? And so she takes you back to your childhood, and yeah, it's quite a good book. I would recommend that. That one definitely took a while for me to finish because it is so dense, but I gave that 4 stars. This looks so ugly, but I will fill these in at the end, I promise. So that's page 1 done. That's the first 16 books of the year. And now I have to try to line it up. My husband just called me, so I'm thrown off a little bit. Did I do this off camera? Oh god, I just realized it might have been out of frame. I have no idea. Oh my god, was that out of frame the entire time? I zoomed in and that's what happens. I cut it off. But let's continue with the books. There's just a couple more books. I think 8 more, maybe a couple more. But the next book I read was Bride. I rated this 3.5 stars, but I actually really enjoyed this book. So I finished it really quickly, but I think I rated it a 3.5 because the plot wasn't that great. It was a little cliche. Character development was really rushed. I feel like it went from 0 to 100 really quickly, and it should have been longer. I feel like it was just too rushed. So even though I really enjoyed it, I don't think it was that great of a book, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think it started off great and I loved the concept, but it just, I don't know, it kind of all went downhill from there and was a little bit too cliche for me. This is going to be hard to try to line up. It's not too bad. Maybe I should color it in here because the paper is quite thick, so my pen always goes off the edge. But this one I gave 3.5 stars. It actually is a lot easier to color here. Maybe I will do it here. And then I read the book 2 in the Crescent City series. Again, not my favorite, and I honestly was relieved when this was over. I feel like she worked in so many characters into the story, which I get, some people will enjoy, but for me personally, I felt like it just took away from further developing any single character. It was just all a bit too surface level for me. And it wasn't terrible writing. I just felt like I couldn't really connect with any of the characters, and I kind of guessed the ending and I guessed some of the main plot twists. So I don't know. It wasn't my favorite. Me and Sarah J. Maas unfortunately do not get along too well, but we are civil about it. So I gave this a 3.5 stars because I respect the world building and the ability to weave the stories of different characters together. I do admit that is difficult. That is a skill. But whether or not I enjoyed it is a different story. Not a super fan of the characters or the world. So like these two books got the same rating, but like I really loved this book and didn't love this book so much. So I feel like I take my ratings with a grain of salt because it's just, I don't know, it's so subjective. It depends on so many different things. And I try to rate it consistently, but yeah, it's not. The next book I read was a non-fiction book called BFF. And it says, A Memoir of Friendship Lost and Found. This book was interesting. So friendship has always been confusing to me. It's kind of the opposite. Like, I feel like it's common to have like relationship issues or questions and people make friends very easily. For me, it's been the opposite. I find friendships very confusing and troublesome. Like I've had bad experiences with friendships. Oh, this damn corner. And so I'm just, hungry to consume more friendship content. And I wouldn't say I loved this book, but it was interesting. I personally didn't, I respect the author for her honesty, but I wasn't a fan of how she approached her friendships, and it was the complete opposite of what I had hoped this book would be about. And it ended up being like the perspective of like the other person that I struggle with. So my past friendships that have been a struggle, it's almost like reading their perspective in this book, which was a little uncomfortable and confronting to say the least, but it was still interesting. And there was still some, why is this corner not sticking down? There was still some interesting insights, but I wouldn't say that I loved the book, but I still rated it a 4 stars because I think I did highlight quite a lot and there were a lot of interesting observations about friendship, and it read like a fiction book because it was so interesting. So she clearly was a great writer. She clearly is, a great writer. And it is very honest and raw and vulnerable. And this was another random library read. I think I might have seen it on my library's like new releases page, so I reserved that book. I had never heard of this book before that. And then I read Lovely Bad Things. So I read this last week, I think. What date is it now? It's the 16th. Now, I finished this on Wednesday. I have no idea what I read. This was honestly such a bizarre book. It's another dark romance, but I don't want to ruin it. And I thought the philosophy elements were interesting-ish, but I don't think it was done well. It's almost like dark romance meets secret history, and I didn't like the secret history. I have a lot of opinions about that book, but I was disappointed because the cover was beautiful of this book, and it was just such a strange book. Like, I felt like, are we even caring about the plot at this point? Because it's jumping all over the place. It's escalating. Things aren't making sense. The characters aren't really speaking to each other. It was, not my favorite. So I gave that a 2.5 stars. It does get the half star because the writing wasn't terrible. And honestly, it started out well. And then I was, the philosophy discussions piqued my interests, but it didn't feel like a nice polished story. It still felt very rough. So that's a 2.5 from me. A lot of vibes and not much substance again, unfortunately. And I'm so sorry if you love the book, but that's my rating of it. Then I read Yellowface. I just finished reading this a couple of days ago. And my God, this book, it made me so angry. And I had no idea what to expect. This is such a popular book. I actually knew this one was popular. And so I avoided reading it for a while. I like to wait until the hype dies down a little bit before I read it, just because I want to form my own opinion about it. But this book angered me, and the whole point of the book, I read that the author wanted the book to feel like an anxiety attack, and she succeeded because it was extremely, I can't even describe it properly. This book aggravated me, but it was so smart. It was so smart the way that she wrote this, and I already knew that she was a great writer, so I'm not surprised. But there are so many layers of commentary, like social commentary in this book. It's just so tongue-in-cheek and so clever that even though I hated the character, that was the point of the book. I forgot to color it in first. I don't want to get into it, but I've heard that people relate to the character in the book, which I find so concerning. I find that so... I don't know. I just find that so concerning. Like, yes, she's witty, but no, I do not feel sorry for her in the slightest. Like, yes, I feel anxious for her, but that does not mean I relate to her at all, or I like her at all, or I feel bad for her at all. So it was very worrying to see that some people really related to this character, because I think that was not meant to be the point of this book. But there wasn't meant to be a clear good and bad side with this book, which is what I found so fascinating. It's one of those, it's almost like Emma by Jane Austen, where you're not really meant to like the main character. That's the point of the book, because I remember everyone was saying how much they hated Emma, but it is a very confronting, aggravating, and frustrating book, which is so clever on R.F. Kuang's part, because that is the purpose of the book, to rile you up, and I think she did it so wonderfully with so many sharp takes on our culture and society. And the very last book I have read, but I'm going to add a few more that I'm going to read, but the one I've actually read, which I just finished, was... Okay, look, so I don't know how to say this. I remember looking it up, and I think the absolute correct pronunciation of it was with the K sound, so Kirke or something. I don't know anything about Greek mythology, but I think people say it as Circe or Circe. I'm so sorry. I don't know how to say it. Please do not come to me for any Greek knowledge. This was, I think, a popular book. I think I've seen it mentioned a few times, or people have raved about it. I found this one another disappointing read, and I know some people really, really loved it, but I think because I am not familiar or that interested in Greek mythology, that I already am not the right demographic for it. It was a beautifully written book. I will give her that, Madeline Miller, but in terms of, look, I said I did it again. I said I like character-driven stories. This one is very much a character-driven story, and it was interesting. And look, I still rated it 4 stars, but did I love it? Definitely not as much as other people seem to be raving about it. I also saw that people were saying that, you know, this book really moved them. They learnt so much from this book and it taught them a lot about life. I don't know what I was missing, but I don't feel like I learnt anything from this book. It's not a bad book. Please don't get me wrong. I'm just not saying that I walked away from the book feeling like it was a great book. Like, it was a very solid book, but I didn't love it. My life wasn't changed in any way. I feel like I'm doing a terrible job explaining my reviews. But it was a good book. It was a solid book. Beautiful writing. I highlighted a lot of beautiful passages. I don't know. I feel like the context matters with this book, and you're supposed to understand that she's giving a voice and a story, like a reimagined retelling of this otherwise very unknown and overlooked character in Greek mythology, like this person. But because I'm just taking it as it is, a book about this person that I know nothing about, I think I'm not able to appreciate that nuance as much because I'm not as well informed about Greek mythology. I don't regret reading it. I still think it was beautiful, but I wouldn't go as far to say that it was profound and that I learnt a lot of lessons about it. It was interesting, at the very least. So I'm currently reading Who is Wellness For? So I will stick that in. There's a little bit of another book here. This was recommended to me by Chris from L&M again, and it was a heavy hitter. Instantly, I had no idea what to expect going in. Like, I just assumed it would be about, you know, the whitewashing of wellness. I've read a book about that before, but like the whitewashing of wellness and, you know, how it excludes minority groups and maybe how we're not taking into account the history of some of the wellness practices. So I thought it was more just a commentary on, like, you know, race and cultural things, but it became like part memoir in the beginning. I say that word so weird. I know, memoir. I don't know why. It doesn't sound right coming out of my mouth. But I did not expect the retelling of her childhood trauma. And I've been highlighting so much in this book. So I highly recommend this book just for the childhood trauma retelling alone. Trigger warnings, of course, but it is extremely validating the way she talks about her mother, and I feel like this deserves so much more attention. I may give it a little bit more of a feature. I do plan on typing out some of the quotes and putting it in my comment place. It's just a stunning book so far. She is a stunning writer. There are parts of the book that I don't like. I'm about 20% of the way through, but just the way she talks about her childhood trauma is just like poetry almost. It's beautiful, but dark, but validating, and just incredible. Just incredible the way she does it. So definitely highly recommend it, but there are trigger warnings. I keep peeling it off before I can... Oh wait, that's fine because I haven't finished it yet. I can just stick it down without reading it. Okay, I'm also currently reading Fall of Ruin and Wrath. So it's by Jennifer L. Armentrout, and I loved her series From Blood and Ash. Not a perfect series. I feel like it went downhill after book 2. After book 1, really. Book 1 was amazing. So I was really keen to read her other books because she has so many books that she has written. I am not loving this book so far. I feel like it's kind of cringe and a little bit cheesy. The inner like dialogue kind of thing. But it's still kind of interesting. So I'm going through it pretty fast. It is kind of long. I don't think it's too long, but I am getting through it kind of fast. But I don't know. I mean, she is the queen of cliffhangers and plot twists, so I will probably say that I don't want to read the next one, but she'll make me, so we shall see. But this is the other book that I'm currently reading. So I'm reading this in the morning and lunchtime, and this at nighttime, and also in the morning sometimes. We have almost finished with this sticker sheet. Very satisfying. But this is probably a 3-star read, and this is maybe a 4 or 5-star read, not sure yet. And I printed these 2 off because I am also planning to read. Hang on. This needs to go in my media log, I think. I think I forgot to print out another one. But this one. And then I think I will save these. Because I borrowed this from the library. I feel like I've heard this one from people online. Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. I read Chloe Gong's previous book. I forgot what it was called now. Why can't I remember what it was called? But it was the Romeo and Juliet retelling. I actually really liked that. I don't think it was rated that well, but I actually really liked the way she wrote her characters. So like her main character was quite fierce and stoic, which I feel like is not a common character trait. I feel like the women tend to be on the feistier level, which is fine. I love the feisty as well, but I just found her character development interesting. So I'm gonna stick. Do I care about the order? Do I save this? I might save it and talk about it when I've actually read it, and then I'll glue it in just so like it's nice and consistent. But let me know how often you want me to do this. Do you want me to wait until I've got a whole page? Because this is already quite long. Maybe I just do a month at a time. That might work as well. So I guess next month, end of April, I will glue in the rest of the books. But I've got 2 pages left for it. I think that's, oh no, 6 pages. Wait, so we're already halfway through March and I've already used a page and a half. 3 months. So that should be another 3 months. I think that kind of works out. I'm not sure. I remember calculating and it worked, but it's not, because 16 times 4 pages is only 64. Oh, wait, sorry, 6 pages. 16 times 6 is 96 books. I left it blank just in case I didn't read more than that, but yeah, I think I will use all of those pages. It looks so pretty. It looks so nice. This is just really cool for me to see all the books that I've read this year. I would say so far it's been a really good reading year. We haven't had too many slumps. I probably should fill this in as I talk to you. I haven't had too many slumps, and I feel like I am mixing up the genres quite a lot. I think definitely it's obvious that I'm going towards the fantasy and the dark romance, but like lately I've been reading some non-fiction and then some other fiction books that are, you know, a little bit different. I do love the idea, nobody asked, but I'm telling you, I do love the idea of a Kindle or a Kobo or whatever kind of reader, but I just don't love the idea of having another device. Like my phone works well enough, and if I travel, I don't want to bring another device. So for me, the phone works really well, and I know people can't read on their phones, like it hurts their eyes, but it's actually totally fine for me. But I hope you enjoyed this little update to my reading log. I have no idea if this was interesting at all. Maybe not interesting in the slightest if you do not read these books, if these are not the books you read, or maybe you just don't enjoy reading. I don't think you would have clicked on this if you didn't enjoy reading. But if, based on the books that you've seen me read and enjoy, if you think there are books that I would like, I would love your recommendations. So you need to know I'm not a big recommendations person, as in I don't like people's I sound like a terrible person, but I don't like people's recommendations generally because I think I am really picky with my books, and there's no rhyme or reason as to why I like certain books or not. But anything like Divine Rivals, Nocticadia, Bride, what else? Those are the main ones. A Spell of Good Things, beautiful. Or any non-fiction books. I have so many non-fiction books on my to be read. I just feel like it's overwhelming, but it's such a lovely feeling to think that like I could never run out of books to read. There are so many books in the world just waiting for me to read them, and that makes me so excited. And I love the feeling of finishing a book and starting a new book. I don't often, like rarely ever, DNF a book, like do not finish a book. I tend to kind of push through, and I don't know why, like it makes sense. If you don't enjoy the book, like stop reading it. What are you doing to yourself? But I just have this like compulsion to finish. Actually, with movies, I'm much more inclined to DNF it. But with books, I'm just committed. I need to finish it. Now that I've invested a little bit into reading it, actually, there's a few books where I've started and I can already tell it's going to be a hot mess. And it's just more smut than story. Those are the ones I tend to abandon. But I have this kind of like hopeful compulsion where I'm just like, maybe it gets better. Maybe if I just keep reading, it gets better. But I also want to finish it so that I have a reason, almost like I have a reason to prove that I hate it. Because I've read the entire book and now I can say clearly that this is why the book was bad. That's probably very hateful of me, but that is the end. That's glue tape. That is the end of my little reading update. This feels very strange but satisfying, just feeling the paper. I don't think I mentioned, but it was probably obvious. I printed this on the back of scrap paper, but I don't think you can tell. Like I literally just printed this on standard printer paper, just on the back of like letter mail that I get. So the quality is not amazing, but because it's just paper, it's quite thin. And I think honestly it looks good enough. So I don't tend to print on photo paper for this stuff. But I think at the end of the year, then I would choose my 12 favorite books to put here, if I have 12 favorite books. Now I'm going to hop over to my computer and I'm going to show you my Notion tracker, like my simple way of how I track these books and how I use it every day. So I think this is a fairly simple reading log tracker. I don't know what to call it. It was called reading list for a long time and then I realized it didn't make sense, so I have since changed it to reading log. But basically it's just a table of books that I have read, and this is everything. This is not filtered, but basically each line in the table corresponds to a book. And so you can see at a glance I'm currently reading 2 books. And you can see the author name, you can see the progress here, and the progress is calculated with a formula that I found online. I definitely didn't do it myself, but you write the number of pages in the book as your goal and then the pages that you've read. And this way you can see how much progress through the book that you've made. And for me personally, I really like tracking the amount of pages that I've read and how much progress I've made through a book. I'm just a like progress tracker person. Like I really need to know how far through something I am. I just get really caught up in finishing things, so it's really satisfying to me to see like the progress of a book. And so what I really love is that not only can I track the date that I've started reading the book and the date that I finished reading the book, if you open up the page, you can see here when you hover over the item, there's an open button. If you open up the page, I've just added a bunch of dates, but what I like to do is track how much I've read on each day as well. This is totally unnecessary, but I do really like that you can open up the book page and you can add more details. So if we go into Who is Wellness 4, I've got the page tracker here, but I've also added quotes here, and this is copy and pasted from iBooks, so it's still a bit messy, but it's just a really nice way to keep the quotes together. And this is completely searchable, and this is why I really like using Notion to track this stuff. And then what I've done here is create a filter at the top for 2024 so I can keep track of how many books that I've read for the year. As you can see down here at the bottom, it says count 23. If it doesn't have it, you can just click it and click count all, so you can see how many books are there in total. Now it's taking a while to calculate, but it should say 24. So I'm a bit of a tracker person, so I just really like being able to keep track of that. 23, sorry, not 24. But if you go into the read section here up top, I don't actually use this because I can't be bothered, but I stopped doing this in 2022, but you can add book covers if you wanted to see like a visual representation of all the books that you have read. As you can see, I've only done a few. And this is so interesting to look back and see all the books from 2022. It's, I think, better for my memory to see the visual books rather than just the name, because this like triggers like such a memory for me. I can see it instantly. So if I remember, I think I will get back into doing this because I really like it. And you can also change the view, not in properties. I always get that mixed up. It's in card size. So you can change that to medium, so the book covers are a little bit bigger depending on what you want. So I think Notion is really powerful for this. It's fun. It's so customizable, but that's basically how I track my books. It's really, really simple. But I also love, like, if you're not familiar with Notion, you could also, organize this into different things again. So I could add a toggle and write favorite quotes here, and then just drag some of my favorite quotes in here. I could also highlight it if I wanted to. As you can see, I bolded a little bit of it, but I could just highlight that and just keep my favorite quotes there. Bold this if I wanted to, and I could hide it, so I just feel like Notion is incomparable for tracking. But again, I love the analog aspect to it too. So I do log it that I start or finish a book, but I think because Notion works so well for me personally, I don't feel the need to have a reading journal. Not that I would never have one, but I just feel like this is so efficient and so easy to update. So I check this page, well, not check, I update this page every single day after I do some reading. So I go in and update the number of pages that I've read. And if I start a new book, I click on new here. And I've also created just a really simple template to save me like 3 clicks. But I click on new book and it instantly replaces the title with new book. The status is changed to reading, and the date started is the date that you created that item. But my favorite thing about this is probably the progress tracker, and also that you can just open the book so you can add more details in here. So in here you could add thoughts like, I'm really enjoying this book right now. So that's what I used to do in the past, and I still do that sometimes depending on how much the book provokes me to have a reaction. But typically I don't think I write too much. So Human Bride, I really enjoyed it, but was it 4-star worthy? Not really. Plot was a bit cliche and weak. Again, I did really enjoy that book. It was really fun. So it's fun to have those little notes in there as well. But yeah, like I said, I've had this tracker since 2022, so I've been using it for over 2 years now. And it's really nice to see all of this stuff since 2021, actually. But as you can see, I didn't really, this table is all over the place because I didn't rearrange it. The way I've done this 2024 view, it's the same table, but I filtered it based on the date that the book was finished, like the date completed. And so it's just really easy to see, oh, let's go into 2023. Let's see how many books I've read. So I read 59 books in 2023, but so far in 2024, I've read 23. So I'm already like almost halfway through. In 2022, I read 87. I think I read a lot of shorter books in 2022. That's why that's a lot higher. And in 2021, I only read 22, I think. So, I'm just really glad I have this entire list of books. Like, this makes me so happy that I have these stats, because I always regret not tracking things. Once I start a new journaling practice, I just regret not starting earlier. So I love that I have all this in Notion already. It's all here. But yes, so I have created a template version for you, which is pretty much the exact same thing, just without all of my books, because you don't need that. And I've given you examples here. I've just chosen some random books, but I will leave a link to this template, this free Notion template, so you can use this yourself. You can customize it. You can change the image. I just chose a random image from Unsplash here, but you can choose anything that you want. If you find this helpful, please let me know, because that would just make me really happy. I would love to know if anyone actually uses it. So yeah, I primarily track my books and the movies I watch in a very, very similar format. The movies, I think it's probably the exact same format, but this is how I track everything. And just for my own benefit, for fun, I also write it down in my daily logging journal, but mostly everything is in here, and this is what I refer to. So this is always favorited on my sidebar, because this is the one Notion page that I would check and update consistently every single day when I read. But that is it. You could change the icon here, by the way. You could upload your own icon if you really wanted to. But let me know if you have any questions, and I hope you enjoy the free Notion template.